So I've gotten a lot of requests to kind of talk about my story and where I'm at and how I'm doing it. So I wanted to give a brief intro about kind of my situation. So I've had Hashimoto's disease for about, I would say 20 years. I'm sure there are several years where I wasn't diagnosed. I was just feeling really bad. And so I think I've had it for at least 20 years. I'm 35 years old now, and I would say the worst of it was in my 20s. I felt like complete fatigue, utter fatigue. Like I could not function. I couldn't do anything. There were many moments where I would wake up from bed and just stare at the wall. Like that's how much fatigue I had, and it was debilitating. I wasn't able to hold down a job. And before I was diagnosed, I felt like I was just lazy. Like I thought, this is who I am. And it was very discouraging and very disheartening and very depressing. But thankfully, eventually I got diagnosed. But you know, it wasn't like resolved after I took medication. I still felt like off. I felt like I wasn't normal. I had anhedonia, which basically means like all of my emotions were blunted. And even to this day, like I have some of these symptoms still. But it's so much better that it's kind of crazy. So that's how things started. And I went through a period of time where I was experimenting with different medications. I was experimenting with levothyroxine and liothyronine, T3, T4 combination therapy. I tried NDT, I tried Nature-Throid, I tried Armour, and then I went back on T4 only. And I've experimented with coming on medication, getting off of medication, weaning off, hoping that my body would kind of remember how to produce hormone on its own. Obviously, all of that was foolish because if you have an autoimmune disorder, it means that your body's fighting its own organs. So that's what was happening with me. And, I was very, very driven to resolve this because it was affecting my life in severe ways. And I've probably spent and this is not an exaggeration, I've probably spent over $100,000 on just different experiments and different therapies to try to improve my condition. So I've basically tried everything. I've tried every diet. I've tried every intervention. I even infected myself with human hookworms. At one point, I had severe allergies. It was just a mess. I had a lot of things going on at once. And I went on a vegan diet, which was probably the worst I've ever felt. And then I went back on, a mixed diet. And then I went to the carnivore diet. And the carnivore diet was really the start of my healing process. It wasn't really the end-all be-all. I didn't feel immediate relief. But after about 5 weeks of being on the carnivore diet, I realized that I had so much more energy. I didn't need naps in the middle of the day anymore. And then I'm like, okay, I'm on to something. Now, I think the carnivore community is on the right track, but I think they miss a few key things that are required for healing. And that's not necessarily their fault. It's so complicated, and I've learned that essentially a lot of things have to be in the right place for you to actually start healing. So there's a lot of different groups that are isolated, and they're each trying to solve a problem by saying that this is the root cause, and then they attack it. And another group says, no, this is the root cause, and then they attack that. But really, you need all of them kind of to come together and organize. And that's kind of what I did. I created my own protocol, and I'm eventually going to write it out so that everyone can kind of see what I did. But I combined all these different kind of modalities and therapies, and it seems like it's working for me. And the reason why I think it's working for me, the reason I can say I am reversing my Hashimoto's is because I do blood tests every 6 weeks approximately, because that's usually, when you make a change to your medication, it takes 6 weeks to actually see the difference. Every time I test over the last 6-7 months, my TPO antibodies have come down. Every single time I tested, except for one time, and that was because I went on vacation and I basically went off the diet. I ate whatever I wanted to eat, and I noticed that my antibodies elevated a little bit. It didn't go up, to what it was before, but it did elevate. So obviously diet matters, but the thing is, I was on the carnivore diet for a long time, and my antibodies did not budge. Well, I don't want to say they didn't budge, but because the lab test doesn't really count over 900, it was always over 900. So it could have been going down a little bit, but it didn't really start going down until I did 2 protocols. The first is a ultra high vitamin D protocol, and it's interesting because you think, okay, if my vitamin D levels, if you actually test them, if you do a blood test and they're in the right place, you think you're good. But the reality is, people, especially people that have autoimmune disorders, they have what's called vitamin D receptor disrepair. They have the actual vitamin D receptor, it gets like messed up or damaged in some way through whatever it is that caused your autoimmune disorder, also impairs your vitamin D receptors. So the only way to fix that is to, one, you have to restore your vitamin D, it's kind of like a catch-22, because if your receptors are bad, then you can't really get your vitamin D up. I mean, you can get your blood vitamin D up, but that doesn't mean your body's actually absorbing it. So, and the other thing is you have to remove the thing that is damaging the vitamin D receptor, and that is definitely 100% diet. And that's one of the reasons why people's vitamin D levels go up when they go on the carnivore diet. It's because when you're going on a diet that's so restrictive, you're basically cutting out all the things that can cause inflammation. You're removing all the different foods, or carbs, for example. When you have a blood glucose spike, you are essentially damaging red blood cells and endothelial cells. So when you remove all of that, you're kind of giving your body a break to repair the receptors. And then, by taking the high vitamin D doses, you're giving your body a chance to actually activate, because vitamin D is not just a vitamin, it's a hormone. And there's a crazy chart. And when I do a more formal video, I'm going to do a longer video where I talk about the whole protocol. I'll actually show you guys these charts. It's actually crazy how many gene expressions are influenced by vitamin D. It's like in the hundreds. So when you see the before and after of how your body kind of turns on the switch before and after you have sufficient levels of vitamin D, it's a no-brainer. Like this is where you need to start. So in my opinion, you start with a carnivore diet. One, because it eliminates all potential sensitivities that you might have. And two, it improves your microbiome. And I know that's kind of controversial because people think you need fiber to feed your microbiome. But actually, short chain fatty acids, do just as much in terms of increasing your alpha diversity for the microbiome. So you can do that on a high fat diet, no problem. So you do the carnivore diet. You take high doses of vitamin D. Now, this is the part that's a little bit risky, because if you take too much vitamin D, you do have a risk of hypercalcemia and hypoparathyroid. I don't know what the name of it is, but having a low PTH. So you have to be very careful. You have to read about it a lot, and you have to make sure you're doing blood tests. I did blood tests every month. A Coimbra protocol doctor will do a blood test every 3 months, but I wanted to be extra cautious because I'm doing this on my own. I'm not a doctor, so don't do anything I did. But for me, I was taking 120,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. So the most the doctor will prescribe is 50,000 per week, but I was taking more than double that on a daily basis. And I was doing that slowly. So I'd taper up. I would go from 20,000 to 50,000 to 80,000 to 100, then 120. And then I would start going back down after I was, making sure my calcium wasn't elevated. As soon as my calcium showed a little bit of elevation, I tapered down. Right now I'm at 20,000 IUs a day. And my PTH is below the reference range, but that's actually okay. And again, I'm going to kind of go into more detail about that. But the fact that I needed to reduce my vitamin D and my TPO antibodies are still coming down means, to me at least, that I think I've successfully repaired my vitamin D receptors. So that's a huge win for me. Another thing that I had to do in parallel is something called the Shoemaker protocol. And I didn't do the complete protocol. But the Shoemaker protocol is, so the long and short of it is basically this. When you're exposed to mold or other types of toxins and you have poor vitamin D status or vitamin D receptor disrepair, essentially your body can't adequately remove or detox the mold from your body. So the Shoemaker protocol introduces something called cholestyramine, or there's another medication, and it's a binding agent. So cholestyramine is actually for cholesterol. But if you take it, it binds to the bile in your, I think, large intestine or maybe small intestine. and that bile is sticky, and that bile basically clings to these toxins that can't be detoxified the regular way, and then it excretes all of it together. So when you do this repeatedly, your body creates new bile, and that new bile will stick to anything that is potentially toxic and harmful, and it'll excrete it, and then eventually you have new bile and no toxins that it needs to attach to. So there's a lot of studies on this. This is not just like hocus pocus or anything like that. There is a lot of studies on it, and there's a lot of expensive treatments and stuff you can do, but I kept it very simple. To me, I thought if I just remove these toxins, if I fix my vitamin D receptors, my body should be able to detox on its own, and that is exactly what happened. So there's a test called VCS, visual contrast sensitivity, where it measures your ability to distinguish between different shades of gray. So there's and you can do it on your phone or your computer. It's very simple, and it takes like 10 minutes. And it's free. You do the test, and it shows you lines, and it'll change the direction, and it'll make the lines smaller, more thin, and more closely together. And as you do this, you choose which direction you think the lines are going. And if you have mold toxins, there is neuroinflammation that actually causes you to not be able to distinguish the gray lines after a certain point. So first of all, I thought this is really fascinating. And I have tests. I did like 15 tests over the course of my treatment. In the beginning, I scored around like 65% or something like that. Now I'm in the 90s. So obviously something is happening. And I stopped taking the cholestyramine after about a month and a half, 2 months. After that, they recommend that you do nasal sprays to kill off any Marcons, they call them. Marcons are I don't remember the M stands for, but it's basically antibiotic resistant bacteria that's kind of in your sinuses. So that's the second part of the process. There's a few steps, but then the ultimate goal is to get to a step where you're doing VIP nasal spray. VIP is vasoactive intestinal polypeptide nasal spray. So I started that, but I wasn't really consistent with it. But either way, I thought that I felt that I was healing without needing to go through the whole protocol. And I think it's because I combined it with the Coimbra protocol, and I combined it with the carnivore diet. So one, it wasn't like a situation where I had runaway inflation that was, holding me back. I was kind of giving my body everything that it needs nutritionally. I was giving my body a chance to heal by reducing inflammation to near zero. My high sensitivity CRP, which is a blood test that measures inflammation, was basically zero. I had no inflammation. My insulin was extremely low, which is excellent. My blood glucose is generally always under 80. So when you stack all of these modalities together, you really give your body everything that it needs. And I think the vitamin D was kind of like the final thing. So my latest blood tests, I've posted it on Reddit, show that my TPO antibodies are now, for the first time in over 20 years, under 400. And there are studies that show that people who have antibodies under 400 who don't yet have a diagnosis of hypothyroidism generally don't develop hypothyroidism. So it seems like I've hit that threshold. Now the question is, am I going to be able to completely run off medication? I don't know the answer to that, but technically Hashimoto's is diagnosed via the antibodies. If you don't have the antibodies, you don't have Hashimoto's. You could still have hypothyroidism, but you don't have Hashimoto's. So I think I'm going to get there. I mean, the trend is clear. It's as long as I stick to what I'm doing, I think I'll get there. But a lot of people are asking, how did I get here? What did I do? So that's what I did. And like I said, I'm going to see if I can create a very formalized protocol that can help people through this process in the most cost-effective way, because it's really expensive to learn all of this. And it took a long time for me to learn these tricks and to stay consistent, and the discipline it requires to experiment and do the blood tests. I probably spend over $150, $200 a month just on blood tests. So it's definitely not easy, but if you're determined, and I think it's worth it, then 100% it can be done. So that's all I have for today, guys. Feel free to ask me any questions. If you compare this video that I just shot to my previous videos, I think you'll see a big difference in my energy levels and my ability to kind of communicate. I think that the results speak for themselves. At the end of the day, if my blood tests are showing that my antibodies are coming down consistently every time I test, then I'm doing the right thing. And this is something that my doctor said would never happen. They said, if you have Hashimoto's, you're going to have it for life. And the longer you have it, the less likely is you're ever going to recover from it. So obviously that's not the case. And I just want people to know that there is hope out there. There is a light at the end of the tunnel if you are able to be a little bit disciplined. I think we just need to kind of tweak all the different protocols and get a better understanding of what we need to do so that we can holistically kind of cure this thing from all angles. So thanks for watching if you're still here, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.